Let's see. So I don't know if you know about the old days, but Centipede used a Motorola 6502 processor that was kind of one of the best processors around at that point. And I had used that same processor when I worked at GM before I worked for Atari. And at GM, we were using it to control 7 sensors under the hood of a Cadillac, the 1980 Seville Cadillac that we were working on. So it was a really great transition for me to go from programming. I did things like cruise control and cabin control, the temperature settings in the Cadillac Seville. And so it was a really great transition for me to go from GM to Atari and do something that was a lot more fun. But anyway, it was the same processor. And I tried on the internet to find a 6502 reference card, and this was the closest I could come to it. It doesn't look exactly like the one that I used, but it's close to it, and this is a little detail from it. But the ref card had the instruction set, and I think there were 34 different instructions in the 6502 instruction set. And the ref card showed the instruction, the name of the instruction, the opcodes, meaning the hex code for each of the instructions, the number of cycles that the instruction took in the processor's clock, and the number of bytes that it ended up, depending on the addressing method that each of the instructions took. And so I was constantly supposed to be counting my bytes and counting my cycle time so that I didn't run over. I don't know if you know, in the interrupts, the clock time has interrupts, and if you run over the amount of clock time, there's tearing on the screen. So you're supposed to always be avoiding the running over of cycle time and trying not to tear things. And then there was always the constraint of the small amount of space. So I was always supposed to be keeping track of all those things in addition to making something that looked good and was fun to play. So. And this is a hex code table that the reference card for the processor and the hex code table were really the two tools that I kind of kept in my hands while I was doing things. After a while, you know, if you use hex all the time, you don't need a table anymore. You don't have to look at a printed source of information. But I never, a lot of the guys were able to work without a reference card, but I pretty much always had to. I knew a lot of the opcodes by memory after a while, but I was always checking the number of bytes and the cycle time. So I pretty much always had my ref card in my left hand while I'll get to our method of how we did things. So the 6502 code that I used to develop Centipede was handwritten on computer printouts, and the handwritten code went into an in basket. And at Atari, there were 2 women who sat in a room and took the everyone's code that came in to the in basket. They sat and typed and compiled and printed the modifications that we made each day. And then they made a prom in addition to giving us the printout. And so the printout and the prom went into an out basket. And so I would go by and throw my handwritten code into the in basket, and about 2 hours later, circle back around and check to see if it was ready in the out basket. And a prom looks pretty much just like the processor. It's a chip, a programmable ROM. And so the prom would, so I'd pick up a chip that had the new code on it, and then that would go into the development cabinet. I knew where to plug it in and check out what I'd done. And I found this great picture of, this is Dave Toyer back in 1981. And he's sitting at his Atari desk, or his desk in our office, the arcade division of Atari. And I wanted you to notice the giant stack of printouts that he had, and they're all over the place. They're behind him too. And we had this. The thing that's behind him is a cabinet that had a pull down cover on it, and I kept all my special printouts, and I don't know if that's what his are too, but I noticed that he has them behind him too, and he has this giant, like, 4-foot stack, and I don't even think that was the only stack. I just think it's the only one that was showing in this photograph. And anyone who sees this always thinks that the thing on his desk is a really cool big monitor, but it was just a poster if you look at it. I just love that. So, but Dave was the greatest programmer. He made Missile Command and Tempest, and I don't know the games that he made after I left Atari, but the Missile Command came out right before I joined Atari, and Tempest came out while I was there. So, and he made some other games after that too, but he was awesome. He's a really good guy. And at first, Centipede had buttons for controls, and it had the kind of standard Asteroid setup of buttons. And for me, I was not really very able to play with all of the buttons, and it made it just more of a frustrating exercise in trying to work the buttons, and it made it not fun for me. And I really worried about it because in order to develop it, I really had to be able to play it, and it that wasn't happening for me. So, so after I complained about that, and a lot of people who worked there at that time loved the button configuration, and they loved being really great at the buttons, and so they didn't really understand why I was saying that I didn't think I would ever be good at the buttons. So next we tried a joystick, and I spent all my time making that terrible clunking noise that you make when you play Pac-Man. And so that wasn't fun for me either. And so Centipede ended up being able to be the first, I'm not sure it was the first released game that had a trackball, but it was the first game that they built so many of that used a trackball. And it was when the trackball was tried out that it really became compelling for me to play, and I started having a lot of fun playing it, and it got better after that point because, if the programmer isn't having fun at the game, there's not much of a chance it'll be fun. So, but it was fun for me after that. And at this point, I think that the trackball was part of the reason that it was successful with girls and women, because I think a lot of girls and women who were just beginning to come to arcade games, I think that they thought that it was really easy to walk up and just start playing it, that you didn't have to spend a lot of time trying to focus with your hands and figure out what your hands needed to be doing. And I think the trackball made Centipede fit into the idea that Nolan Bushnell, who was is the founder of Atari, his idea is that, and you'll read this a lot of different places where people are writing about game ideas, game concepts, but Nolan always says that a good game should be easy to learn and hard to master. And I mean, that's a very simple idea, but always a good one to remember when you're developing games. And I threw in these last two slides just because they're so funny. Or the first one's funny and the second one was serious. But I thought you might like to know that back then, so in the late 70s and the early 80s, this was my experience, that we went to 2 big gatherings each year. And the first one was called the Coin-Op Convention, and it was always held in Chicago, and it was always held just before Halloween of each year. And the Coin-Op Convention was where all of pinball had been, that was where pinball games were displayed and sold and talked about. But it was also, it was coin-op, and so it was also where, like, laundromat washers and dryers were sold. Anything that operated with a coin. And also the little kids, like the horses you ride outside the grocery store, anything that operated with a coin, that's where those were displayed and traded, and that was the business model of that idea. But so our games, the arcade games, went there too. And I found this picture, and I just love this. That's Nolan Bushnell on the left, and that was sometime in the 70s, and there's sort of a gangster theme, and the coin-op and the whole Chicago, there was just always this kind of motif of semi-organized crime. I mean, it was just, there was just a lot of weird vibe to the whole thing, but apparently Nolan got the clothes for it that year, so just wanted to share that. And then this is a digital image from, that you can't see very well, but from an artist, one of the first digital artists that I was aware of, named David M., and he was a really big deal at this thing that I read about called SIGGRAPH that wasn't talked about very much back then. And because of seeing his images and just falling in love with the idea, the idea of a digital artist who was making just things to look at that point was so unusual at that time that I started wanting to go to SIGGRAPH, and the first one I went to was in 1982 in Boston, and Atari sent me to that one, and a number of other people at Atari wanted to go when I started wanting to go. So, and then SIGGRAPH just got to be a bigger and bigger thing since then, but I was so happy to be involved in it at that time, and to get to go to a few things. And I didn't know the order in which we were going to do this, and so that's the end of that. And I have a short video. How to make a spider in Centipede. Doing it old school, November 1980. Just before Thanksgiving in 1980, I used graph paper at my desk at Atari in the coin-op division for arcade games to draw the spider in my game Centipede. The process looked something like this. Take a piece of graph paper, draw a box on the graph paper, make it 8 squares tall by 16 squares wide to represent a centipede motion object. Draw squares to represent pixels. Draw, draw, draw. Draw some more. When I finished drawing and coloring the spider, I flipped around the graph paper and coded it in hexadecimal, which we always referred to as hex for short. I repeated this process for all the spider leg positions. Then I typed the hex codes into a prom using a prom burner. And finally, I could check out my spider in the game development prototype cabinet. After Thanksgiving, I started on the code to animate my spider. There.
Did you guys do, were you interleaving iterations? So that, because you had the 2-hour window that you described between, did you do another iteration during that and then you'd get things back staggered, or?
Well, it's so funny. You can put a whole bunch of creative people together in one place, but you cannot make them work.
So the 2-hour window was a blessing?
I always looked at it as a lot of fun. That was, and I'm not saying that my work ethic was low or anything. It's just there were a lot of things to do and a lot of people to enjoy, and A lot of people were not even working on anything, so I was at least trying. I spent at least some part of every day trying to work hard, but
Well, I mean, you had there was an imposed downtime, right? Like if you're waiting for a thing to come back that takes 2 hours, what are you going to do?
right, and
Maybe you're playing other people's games.
there were other games in development to play, and there was always the point of having games that we would have had to put quarters into. I mean, we needed to play other things, So I played a lot of Galaga and a lot of Robotron. I don't know if you remember those.
So good.
I love Robotron.
So good.
I love Galaga too. It was kind of like Galaxian. I don't know why one game had two names, but those were games that I played a lot back then. I think some people, in fact, I was trying to read stuff and like prep for this, and I read an interview with Ed Logg that he said that he always made a point of having more than one game going at the same time, so that when he put his code in to be typed up and burned, that he'd have another game to go to, so he would switch off each day. Ed's a really serious guy.
He looks so non-serious on his Wikipedia page. He's standing next to the asteroids machine, all giggly and happy.
Yeah.
Only made asteroids. Like, what can you say? I mean, I have a bunch of design questions. I don't know. Like, I'm gonna probably project a lot. Like, I'm gonna be like, what were you guys thinking with this blah blah blah? And you're like, yeah, we just made it. But I'm actually curious, like, because the thing is, it would have been so easy to just make a game about a centipede coming down the screen, right? You have
It's the original idea that a multi-segmented worm.
Right.
Was the basic idea comes.
So the mushrooms came in later.
The mushrooms came.
Assuming that most of you know what this game is about. We're not talking about, well, maybe we are, but.
No, and
Okay.
we aren't. And people
Okay.
always, and I'm
Really?
happy to get a chance. I'm so happy to get a chance to make that clear, because the minute that they came onto the scene, it was the magic mushrooms, and that is so not my style to. I would never. It's just not a joke that I would make.
Right.
I mean, so.
It fits the theme. Like, there's a centipede, there's something growing.
Yeah,
It's
but
a nice little.
I just
Well, not the
never-
theme of you-
I never
right.
make a drag reference
Right.
like that
Yeah.
in public. I mean, it's just not my style to joke about that. So, yeah.
So you're looking for a blocker object, and it.
I was,
Right.
and that was how it happened. We didn't have anything on the screen, and honestly, I was troubled, wondering if I was turning the centipede where the segment got shot. It was really hard for me to tell whether I was. So we had the code working to the point that the centipede is crawling across the screen. It has the multi-segments. When a segment got shot, the segment behind it needed to turn into a head and to turn. And so I had no confidence that I was turning at the right place, and I wanted to, I thought that if I put some kind of marker on the screen that I'd be able to tell if it was turning. And so my first effort was, I think it was just like either a square or a dot. The thing that I had, I didn't explain this part, but I had 16 motion objects total, and as I explained in the little video, they were 8 pixels by 16 pixels. So the centipede had 14 segments to begin with. The player was 1 segment, and the shot was one of the motion objects. So that's 16. Everything that can move was taken at that point. So the only thing that I could do was write with a bitmap stamp that was 8 by 8. And so I think that my first effort to see if I was turning at the right place was with just a square or a circle, a dot of some sort. And so that looked bad. And I tried to make a rock in 8 by 8 pixels, and that looked like poo. Sorry, be delicate about the whole thing. And so I, worked to try to see what small thing I could make. And the mushroom was the first thing that had an outline that, it looked good.
Right.
It looked pretty.
It does an amazing job of also accelerating the play, right? Like suddenly stuff comes down much faster.
Yeah.
And then later on, when you guys had the other thing with the poison mushrooms, suddenly, like when the centipede touches the poison mushrooms, I think it goes straight down for you, right?
Right, yeah. And so, but that was like we were kind of at an impasse about, well, what do you do now, when we didn't have any, the putting the mushrooms on the screen made it a maze right away, and so that was a good thing.
Right.
And we were able to, riff on that, so.
Yeah, and you riffed amazingly on that. Like, I think that's the that's the most elegant part of the game for me. Like, because for me, like you mentioned SIGGRAPH and like interactive art, I mean, my chosen aesthetic is much more reduced. Like, I would probably put a picture of a finished play of Centipede on my wall because I like the structure that emerges from playing it, right? It's like you start off with a procedural generation algorithm, I assume, which I would like to ask you, because it's not like are they perfectly randomly placed? Do you have, there's probably some simple algorithm in place that.
As far as I know, Centipede was the first game to use the random number generator that I can't remember its connection.
Was it in software or was it?
It was hardware.
Oh.
It was connected in some way to the Atari sound chip that is called a Pokey. And the Pokey gets seeded, and I can't remember at this point all the details of this, and it was hard to get the answer out of anybody too. This was always true, that anything that I needed to know that it was a very frustrating culture because it was always as if all the guys were born knowing all of this stuff, and I was the only one who couldn't understand it. So, but anyway, the random number generator, as soon as I found out that there was a random number generator, I love that because that opens up so much. And so there was a real debate at that point about whether everything should be predictable or whether it was more fun for everything to be different every time based on the random number generator and the clock cycles and anyway, it got seeded somehow, and so you got a different start every time. So I used that with the mushrooms, with the spider.
Oh, the spider.
Yeah, so when the spider appears, where it begins from, that was really controversial that I wanted.
Does it come in at an angle to hit me? Because I could swear it does.
It's random, so it knew nothing about you.
Most frequent cause of death in that game.
Yeah.
It's too too close to the wall, a spider comes in diagonal.
So you don't hang over by the wall.
Yeah. But it's so good to hang by the wall because you can build that tunnel on the side.
But you don't do that.
God damn it.
Yeah. So, but there was a lot of, that kind of thing. That was more of a friendly disagreement about whether you should do something like that.
We still have that friendly disagreement nowadays.
Yeah, and that was settled with the compromise that the spider sound would start X number of nanoseconds before the spider would appear. So as soon as you were supposed to be clued into, as soon as you hear the spider sound,
that's an interesting design decision.
Yeah. So.
Wow.
That was what we compromised on.
So, you mentioned that you guys went to SIGGRAPH in '82.
I did.
I think SIGGRAPH started in '77, so this was still when it was probably tiny, right? This was still in San Jose.
It was in Boston then.
It was in Boston, right? You mentioned that.
And
really, they already moved coasts that early? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, and the next year in '83, it was in Detroit.
Okay.
And let's see, in '84, it was in San Francisco, I think.
Okay.
And anyway.
Because I think similar to the Game Developer Conference is one of those things that started in someone's living room, right?
Yeah.
Like Ed Catmull's living room, I think.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I don't know about the very old days of it.
He's the Pixar guy.
Tiny in the sense, they had a movie night by '82, and the movie night was so fun. That was really great.
This was around particle systems, like Wrath of Khan, that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. How was it like back then at SIGGRAPH for like a game developer? Was this like something, did the graphics research community embrace your presence? Was it not really?
No.
Same. Nothing has changed.
You know.
Actually, yeah.
And, you know, it never occurred to me to introduce myself as,
Right.
you know,
But did you get something out of tech from a technology side, or more from like a visuals inspiration side?
I got it. I I recognized SIGGRAPH as a thing that would help me move on.
Right.
I mean, it's funny now because it never even occurred to me then that I worked with people who were going to stay in that business with that company.
Right.
A lot of people for their entire career. I knew I was moving, I was on a path.
Transient.
I didn't know my path, you know. I didn't know what I wanted to be or what I was good at or anything. And I didn't know what the world would accommodate, you know, for me. Like,
we stayed with Atari for less than 2 years, or like approximately 2 years.
4 months.
2 months and 4 months. Okay.
Yep.
That's a nice little stint in the game industry.
It was long enough. It was in that situation, being the only woman. I mean,
Right.
it was time for me to move on.
So that was the main motive. That was one of the. I mean, I know I read from reading about you on the internet that you wanted to be a writer anyway, right? That had been your dream, which you then.
Well, I was always a huge reader.
Right.
I really didn't. I've read that too.
That's not.
I really didn't. I don't think I thought of that I was working toward being a writer at that point. I wanted to be a reader at that point. I was a reader, but I wanted reading to somehow be. I wanted research to be part of my job, and it is now.
And it is now, right?
Yeah, so, but you know, a lot of. I mean, I think the guys who were serious about, you know, who stayed the whole time, I think that they were game makers, you know, they were game creators. That was games were their biggest thing. My biggest thing was digital, visual things, so.
Have you ever messed with processing or any of these modern tools to do that? There are so many. We'll talk about it later.
Okay.
Like I'll show you. I'll send you a couple of links because I think you'd actually to see what the landscape is nowadays. Everything that you wanted it to be has happened, and more. It's an amazing time to be a creative coder and make visual art from code.
Yeah.
And there's.
I got to a really good place when I was teaching. I don't know if you want to call it digital tools or multimedia tools or whatever, but when I was teaching 3ds Max and Premiere and Photoshop and Flash all at the same time, I was like, this is what I was supposed to do.
Nice.
I got to the place, and then after that, I was comfortable with, you know, I teach writing and research at this point, and I incorporate all the things that I've done in the past into that. And I'm at the right place now. But boy, it was a long path. It was not laid out. And it took a long time. So if you're a searcher.
It sounds like it was worth it though.
Yeah. If you're a searcher, look for those things that feel resonant to you, that, you know, make you feel like your chest is full, you know, and just keep after those things, and don't quit until you get to that place where you think this is what I was meant to do.
So I could do this for another X hours, but I'm gonna stop myself right there, and I'm gonna start handing it off to the audience and take some questions. So we'll start right here. I don't know. Do we have a microphone for this? Okay. So please wait till the microphone comes your way.
Hold it up and talk into it. I remember playing Centipede on a control pad, and it just was not nearly as good. Most people don't have a trackball anymore.
Right.
how do we preserve games with alternative control schemes?
Does anybody have an answer for that? You know, I feel, I feel like it's important to talk about, like I'm finally to a place where I want to talk honestly and openly about the history of the whole thing. I've just gotten there, and I have no idea what you do about the hardware aspect of the whole thing. I realize that it's important to, it's historical at this point, and I realize it's important to preserve that, and I understand that it's important to preserve that, but I have no idea. Does anybody have an answer for that?
Name of the Stanford professor? Henry Lowood. We have one academic at Stanford who's making a major effort to preserve hardware and software.
That's great.
So, but that doesn't really help you a lot at this point. You could go to Barcade. Barcade has trackball games. In fact, I'm pretty sure that they have Centipede, right? Yeah. Sarah?
So I'm just wondering when you say that.
Oh, sorry. Oh, can we pass it through? Yeah, just.
So I'm just wondering, in terms of you saying that you're kind of finally to a place where you want to talk about sort of the history and stuff. What are kind of the things that that you feel passionately about wanting to sort of talk about with regards to that and your experience and stuff?
And I haven't talked about this at all, so it's kind of, I'm such a private person, but I love talking about it in a weird way. So for years, I wrote little pieces of things that happened in my 2 years and 4 months at Atari. And it turned out, people would say to me, you should write about that. And it turned out that people did not want to read that. Turned out they were not such readers. So finally, and I don't know why it took me so long because I've gotten really interested in making documentaries, and I've made little pieces of documentaries. But finally, it occurred to me, I want to write a screenplay about this. So I've been working on that.
Oh, wow.
And because that gives me so much freedom to, I don't have to, find a platform to talk about things. I can write it as a narrative, and it can be, and that's kind of a visual thing too, in a way too. So I've been working on that.
As a documentary, or more of a.
Not as a documentary.
Okay.
As a narrative screenplay that is based very much on. I've tried to stick to my version of the truth.
Right.
Which is always. It's so funny to go anywhere and say this is the truth, because it's just my version of the truth. So a narrative screenplay gives me a lot of freedom that way, because I can just display my version of the truth, and I don't have to fact check it or anything. So.
I think Aaron has.
Thanks.
All right.
I'm a huge Centipede fan for many years, and I have a question. That's two quick aesthetic questions that I've literally wondered about for like 25 years. First of all, of all the games from that era, Centipede is one of the most powerful and unforgettable in terms of the audio design. And it just got this constant like peck of the Centipede and all these other elements that kind of keep you on edge. And I was just wondering sort of what was the inspiration for that element by element, or how did that come to be that amazing soundscape that you guys have? Really no other arcade from that era compares.
Well, I mentioned the Atari sound chip, the Pokey chip. The Atari had some amazing hardware designers, and I love the 6502 board that I used. It was a very stable board, and And I think by using the random number generator, I pushed the board in ways that it hadn't been before. The Pokey was always really hard for me. I love music, but I don't make music, and I don't make audio of any type. The spider sound was the only one that I did on my
Random.
own. Ed did.
Was it random pitches? Is that the idea? The spider sound is. I mean, is it?
Ed did the boom 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 of the spider of the centipede legs moving. The relentless quality that you talked about, and all of those sounds are really deep, and so I wanted the spider, and also because I agreed to the compromise of the spider sound would be the signal that the spider was about to come onto the screen and possibly wipe you out, because the variable rate of travel of the spider was another thing that was, there was a debate about whether it should be always the same or if it would be okay for it to be going 4 times as fast sometimes. And I thought that all those unpredictable things would be fun. So I compromised on the spider sound, and it needed to be distinctive apart from the other sounds. So that was my sound.
That pretty much makes it, I think, because you've got the flea dropping with that pitch sound, and then that twinkly spider sound is broken up when the spider comes in. It really makes this amazing experience. The second quick question I wanted to ask was basically in Centipede, every level the colors change, and I was just wondering if there were earlier examples of that happening from level to level, and also if you spent a lot of time sort of thinking about how to make the color scheme more and more intense to reflect the more intense action, or if it's just kind of you picked a couple colors and they'd feel more intense because the game is more intense,
We had just 8 primary colors to begin with, and one day, I don't even know what he was doing, but our technician had the cabinet, he had rolled it over into the middle of the room, and so I was just sitting on the chair that I usually sat on because the cabinet was gone, so I couldn't do anything, so I was just sitting, thinking, when is he going to give it back to me? And it was facing me, and he was behind it, and he was doing something with, I don't know, capacitors or something, I don't know. But all of a sudden, the colors all went really pastel and super bright and glowing, and lots of purple and pink, and and I just went crazy for, let's have that.
Yeah.
And so that day when the rest of the guys came back into the lab, they were pissed. But I just thought it was so beautiful, and so I sat around for, I don't know, maybe a week. I mean, and I'm sure I did other things too during that time, but I sat around for a long time going, look, you can put, this and this and this, and it glows. So, and it later when we field tested it, you could walk into the arcade, the darkened arcade, and it would be the shimmering jewel across the room, and so.
Did any games do that from level to level at that point, or was that because I remember Pac-Man didn't do that. They changed the fruit from level to level, but
Right.
I remember I had a Pac-Man Junior on Atari 2600, and they did that from level to level. So at some point, Pac-Man happened, then Centipede, and they adopted that to have that crazy color changes from level to level, which really make you hone in and realize, I'm at the next level. And was there any
Last one.
Yeah, sorry. No, this was
Last one from you.
Was there any reflection on how those colors would make you feel, or was it just randomly selected from level to level and you just kind of went with it?
It was certainly not planned out how they would.
Okay.
I mean, they just made all the guys feel mad, and they made me feel happy. So,
Very cool.
I
can go anywhere with
Do you want to go? Yeah. Sure. We'll get over here in a second. Sorry.
So
Hi.
it was a great talk. Thank you very much. And I never knew that until today that Centipede was co-created by a woman. I think that's pretty exciting for the community. I know we're currently in games are going through this thing. We're trying to get women more involved, and it's a pretty exciting time. And do you have any insight about how we can improve that, or especially I think in the technical side, because that's your background. Yeah.
I know with my own students, I'm really deeply committed to encouraging them to go into the STEM topics. And I do that we were talking, when I first got here, I was looking at the MakerBot 3D printer, and I'm really interested in Little Bits, the little snap together electricity game puzzle kind of thing. I want to have a maker lab at my school because I don't see that things have changed so much. I mean, I don't see that things have changed quickly enough, and I don't see that we've gotten, I mean, I've read over and over that in the game industry at this point that it's 10% women, but I don't see that that's really such an improvement. I mean, that just doesn't, if it's taken 30 years to get up to 10%, we need other things. So I mentioned I used to teach 3ds Max, and it's a 3D modeling program, and I had a hard time with it. I had a really hard time learning to.
You and everyone else.
Yeah, but my male students didn't have that much trouble. They didn't have nearly as much trouble as my female students. And there's actually research, if you go back and look, there was a guy at Stanford in the 70s named, I can't remember his first name, but his last name is Shepard, and he did these 3D rotation tests on males and females,
Right.
and the males are so much better at it. And then I have a friend, and I know I'm making this way too long, but everything all unravels. It's all a big piece of things. But anyway, I think that anytime I can find something that is appealing either to play with or visually or hands-on kinds of things that women don't typically get to take part in, I'm always pushing that on my students. And for example, I have an assignment now that I think that we're really missing out on the idea of, like, I think 3D printing should be for everybody. And I'm telling my students that, I don't care if you think that you're capable of doing this or that you think that you're interested in it or whatever. I think that you have to move in this direction because, I mean, what if people had, when the telephone was invented, what if people said, oh, men only, too hard, women hands off, let's not do that. Or printing with paper. I mean, what if women had stood back and said, oh, I don't know, it's just too much, I can't do that. But so I tell my students that, 5 years from now, you may go to work I teach a lot of nursing students, and I say that, you may go to work for a hospital where they want you to be able to use a 3D printer and make a certain kind of bandage that is appropriate for a certain thing that you see in the emergency room or whatever, and you can't just say that you're not going to take part in this whole segment of, it. So I'm always pushing, and I think
It'd be
that's
great if you could tell your story to the whole world, because I mean, not just here, right? Like everyone needs to know about this. I think it's awesome.
This is being recorded. Hi, world. Right here.
Hi. So, could you tell us about your best and worst day at Atari? Or is that too personal?
Gosh. Let's see. Worst day was without a doubt the day that some 6-year-old, right after, I think it had been maybe 2 weeks after it shipped to some arcade, and I can't remember where this happened, but a little kid turned the score over to 1 million, And it had never occurred to me that that was going to happen. I had played and played and played and played, and like 100,000. And so I just thought, nah, no way, you know. And so within 2 weeks, some tiny kid turns the score over to 1,000,000. I had not left a space for 1,000,000. The score
Just
flowed
flipped over to zero?
into,
Did it flip over to zero or into not a number?
oh, it went
just-
crazy. You know, the display went into a place where it wasn't supposed to be. The counters all went nuts. I mean, just for, you know, I mean, it went crazy for
Did
no
you
reason.
revise the board after that?
Yeah.
How many had already shipped?
I don't know, but so many
Two-
that
two min-
people were way mad at me. And that was a day that I mean, there's always been disagreements about who did what and you know how much I did and all of that. That was the day when I did it all. It was kind of like, you know, your child did this. You know? You know, I owned the whole thing that day. So that was a bad day, but I was like, how did I know? If all of you were so smart, why didn't you check this or mention it? So, and I don't know, there were lots of good days, so I don't know about a best day, but I just remember that as like a really scary, you know, everybody's mad.
Over here? Can you pass it through?
There we go. So these days, especially in the indie game scene, people turn over games so fast. You have these 24-hour game jams where people just pump stuff out. And it was really interesting to hear you talking about how you spent a lot of time not working. And I'm wondering if the time not working was important for you to think about the game, to develop it further, and would you recommend people, your students, maybe not working on something so hard?
I like that question. I think a corporation is never going to suggest that the time that you don't work is important. I mean, that goes against the idea, you know. But, you know, the more we were, I mean, by the time I went to Atari, Nolan Bushnell had sold the company, I think a little more than 2 years before, so he was long gone. People still talked about him all the time, and, you know, he was mythic and iconic, and we were owned at that point by Time Warner, and they were just on a production schedule. You know, they were just, you know, let's just pump out games. There's just a buttload of money to be made, and let's just, you know, try to make it all as fast as possible. I don't think that you can put that idea of, you know, there's so much money to be gathered in, let's do it as fast as we can. I don't think you can merge those ideas of creativity and, you know, being on a path and all of those things. If you take the creative process completely out of the money-making business, which, you know, I almost think that you have to do that. And that's why I'm so thrilled that there's a place where, you know, you gain an education. I mean, we never think about education in terms of the hours that we spend on,
Right.
You know, I make about a nickel an hour for the work that I do at this point. For my students, yeah, for any creative project, I think that there's always a place where, you know, you should walk away from it and clear your head and do something else for a while. And I'm not sure that any project can be accomplished on an 8 to 5 schedule, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, year after year. You know, those things just don't fit together. So, yeah. So I feel so lucky that I get to, you know, set my own hours. And I mean, it's so funny now because I do set my own hours and I work, you know, 18 hours a day, many days. I mean, I just work and work. Everything is something about work until I just pass out and, you know, and I do that school year after school year, and I'm happy to do it, and I feel a lot of satisfaction from what I do now. I like having, you know, I like being able to set those things for myself instead of having someone else tell me what to do. So, you know, people do.
Okay. Do you want to?
So I know that you're in academia, so you're in another kind of field from this, but since you're in the technologies very early and stuff, I'm really curious. I'm really curious what you think about the whole Sheryl Sandberg lean in discussion right now, and if you are exposed to that discussion and what you kind of think about, you know, that message to women.
I've been, you know, I've been following that with curiosity. And I'll go that far. I don't. I think the only reason that you have to have that discussion is because the author of the book Lean In is still in such a male-dominated field. I mean, in such a male-dominated organization. I don't think she would. I never think about whether I'm male or female, or, you know, I'm a teacher and a worker at this point, you know, and I still, you know, I still try to have a decent life. I mean, but I don't know, and I don't have the, you know, not that you asked about this part of it, but I don't have kids, and I just wasn't interested in that, and I think that that's a lot of the lean-in discussion that, you know, the author of that book has kids, and that's been a big part of, you know, that's a big part of that book, that trying to figure out how you fit a family life into a corporate life. So I'm happy to not have to think about those things anymore.
That's a good answer. I think we had, was there someone in the back? Yeah. Can you pass the mic, please?
Since you had a lot of experience with other things later, since you said that you'd started teaching 3ds Max and things like that, do you ever kind of play out a scenario in your head where you stuck with games or moved to a different company and stuck with it a few more years? And do you ever think about what that might have been like?
I did. After I left Atari, I went to a company called Vidya that was started by 3 people from Atari. And then after, I think I had been there about a year, something like that. Not sure about the timing, but Nolan Bushnell bought that company. And we were housed in his Catalyst building, which was a building that was filled with his startup companies. That was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. While I was at Atari, I made one more game that didn't come out that I walked away from. And then while I was at Vidya, I started on another game that one didn't come out either. So let's see. And then I worked for Activision after that for I think about a year. And so I have those experiences of you know, trying prototypes kind of some different things. And after the Activision experience, Activision stock, I worked for them during the months of the crash of, it was after '83, but it was during the even further downfall after that. So their stock was at, I don't know, I can't remember the details, but I think it was at something like $28 or something, and it was worth pennies by the time that I quit working there. So I had just had it with the experience of a corporate game development cycle. So no, after I left, after that experience, I was far enough into it by then that I could tell that I knew there was something that I would be able to do that I wanted to do. I still wasn't sure what it was, but I knew that it was something that was kind of like the visual part of making games, but that was not a game company experience. That was the end of that for me. So.
So like all indie game developers.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what they do nowadays. They try to steer clear of that corporate environment.
Could I say the two ideas? I don't have all that many ideas, but
Or the games that didn't see the light of day, or
oh. I could talk about those, but
no, go. Sorry.
I wanted to say that I always had an idea that, I mean, based on my experience at that time, I always had the idea that that setup was kind of like the old studio system for making movies, way back when. And I always wanted to see game development moved into the same idea that someone would have a concept and, it would get some funding, and then a team would be put together of everyone, being able to use their specialties. And there would be roles, and you would be invited to join this production team, and because then you'd get buy-in. I mean, the way that it was, it was 8 to 5. We were just assigned to do things. We were put with people we didn't necessarily like. If we didn't get along with, we didn't have the same style. They had something, that they didn't. I mean, there's hardly a really great film that. You just don't hear about a director being at odds with the DP, that they need to work closely together and they need to agree that they want to make the same kind of movie. And so that was always my idea, that everyone would be independent and you would join this thing and there would be ideas about how the money would be split and all of that. And,
You're describing our company.
well, that's awesome.
That's how Osmos was made.
That's so great.
So, and that's actually how a lot of indies work nowadays.
That's so great.
Yeah, so it's come to pass. Maybe not on the scope that you had envisioned, but it's happening. It's definitely happening.
Yeah, I don't.
Should come to GEC some year, or Indiecade.
Okay.
I think you'd enjoy it.
Okay.
All right, so okay, I'll ask a question. So I was wondering, like, how you were kind of conceptualizing or thinking about what you were doing at the time. So these days, like, everybody will make these kind of various claims for games as an art form or for this or that. But like when you were working at Atari, how did you talk about what you were doing? Was it like you were making great games or great video games or the future of kind of human culture, or just like something like make a better arcade game with better controls? Like how did you talk about what you were doing?
Well, engineers don't talk very much. We didn't talk like that. I mean, a lot of guys, a lot of the like, especially the hardware engineers, didn't really have casual conversations, and they didn't, they weren't. We just didn't talk like that.
So it's not like you were solving problems in an elegant way or something like that, or not even, or.
No. We were. Honestly, I think the hardware engineers who were developing boards all they were thinking about was how few chips can I use, and is this stable? I mean, those were the two. And the software engineers were thinking, how can I get my butt to sit in the chair and get out some lines of code today? Like. And
Profitability a big part of it?
was what?
Profitability was profitability like a big part of what you had to think about for the design?
No, I never thought about. I mean,
I didn't know if they made you think. Okay.
Just like you can't make somebody work, you can't make them think about something either. So, No, it was so foreign to us when and they were perfectly nice people. I liked them all as people, but when the marketing people would come over and start, spinning their ideas about, demographics and stuff. And I mean, I love all of that in a way. I've come to, I was making things to look at, That's all I was doing. I was really kind of stunned by, actually, and this is another thing that I just didn't understand this at the time, and I still don't understand it. But there were many, many sets of coded routines for detecting the quarter dropping in, and I did not see why we could not take one that was already written. I mean, if it was written for the same board, why couldn't we take stuff from other games and not have to do that again? But it was kind of a point of pride, that you should be able to do all of, and I was just
Within
like,
the company?
yeah.
What?
Within our division. I know. And I had, zip interest in,
Yeah.
I wanted a quarter to drop, but
It's like, I don't want to write that routine again.
yeah. And why? Why would I do that? And you saw the stack of printouts.
Maybe it had
Why
something.
can't I go get it?
Male-dominated environments. Always a good idea.
Very, very competitive, very, And there was always the thing that, well, it was, 40 lines in that game, and I bet it could be 20,
Oh, the pissing contest of coding.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Here? Sorry, can we pass the mic? Now we need you on. We need you recorded.
So something that happens over and over and over in the world of gaming is that a prominent game designer or commentator will loudly and forcefully argue that games that are designed under certain arbitrary constraints, whether budget or time or the display technology or the processor or what have you, are inherently tend to be better than games that are designed with large budgets and generous schedules and all of the processing power and display technology that anyone could dream of. Would you care to share your opinion on this debate with us?
I think that fits with my scenario of, make a team that is like a group that is making a movie. I mean, a movie, any good film starts with a really good script and the constraint of that, and then you're going to try to stick to that. So I would agree with that. I mean, you can't just have infinite anything. And I mean, what would be the pressure to ever finish anything or ever think that you've come to as much as it needs, I mean, I don't think
And that happens all the time. Like, I mean, you probably can speak even from your time, right? Like, how many of the games didn't actually see the light of day?
Oh yeah,
Right.
I mean most, but it wasn't because they didn't. I mean, it wasn't because
It wasn't because they didn't.
infinite anything, time, space.
Okay.
It, like some things have really great gameplay and look bad,
Okay.
or just were not appealing.
Couldn't be saved.
Yeah,
Okay.
and just weren't fun. I mean, there's
Right.
always that question of what is fun.
Yeah.
And some things that sounded like they should be fun really weren't. Yeah, but I think having to make do with what you have is always a good thing. I think it's a good motivator. Sitting around longing for more of anything, and I'll do this as soon as I get more, why not jump in and do it now and work with what you have?
I think we have time for one more question. Do you have one more good closing question? Oh, come on. Here.
Tell us about your favorite project that never got built.
Yes, that's a good one.
Okay. Out of the ones that I worked on, I still long for the game that I worked on at Vidya, and like in the past year when people started asking me about Centipede again because of Atari's 40th anniversary and the 40 years of fun. And
I like how you like, well designed.
And so I've thought about it more in the last year than I mean, I go for long stretches, many years, without thinking about any of this. But anyway, in the past year, I've thought about the game that I worked on at Vidya. It was, I called it the glass bead game after the Hermann Hesse novel. It had these really beautiful beads as motion objects. And the gameplay was that it had a trackball, and using the trackball, the player laid down a string that captured the beads. And then there was a sparkler thing that, so the point was to catch as many beads as possible in the, like trap them with the string, and then go get the sparkler. And the sparkler traveled down the string really fast, and as it hit more and more beads, you got a higher and higher score. So, you know, and then there was a snipper that would break the string, and then all the beads would be loose again. So the trackball laying down the string had this really great swoopy feel to it, and like chasing the beautiful beads, and just all the glimmeriness of it, and then the sparkler with the, you know, explosions. The sparkler would go down the string and blow up all of the beads, and so there was just all this little confetti motion and little and I don't know. I long for that one still.
Did that ever make it to a prototype stage? So you had.
I walked away from that one too. When Video went from this company that had 7 people, and I had known 4 of them really well at Atari. They were like close friends of mine at Atari. So we went from 7 people who I knew the principals as good friends. And we went from this atmosphere of working with, you know, people I really liked, and not, again, lovely people. I really liked a lot of them. But when we got sold so soon after, I mean, to me, the way I felt was that we got sold really soon after I started working with my few friends, and turned into a company of about 50 people, like overnight. I just couldn't do it again. I viewed it as, you know, the beginning of all the, and again, I felt like I was in a really kind of confrontational place, you know, that I went from being with my friends to feeling as if I had to justify myself every day, and I just had no interest in that. So again, I walked away from that game, and I still miss it.
Well, thanks that you spent the years that you did spend making games, because you've made some of the games or the game that was one of the most important for my upbringing when I played it as a kid, as an 11-year-old. So this was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. So it's.